Today I'm joined by my guest David Lindley from By Design. David, how you doing?
I'm very good, David Mintz. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. We like to check in with you regularly to see what's going on in the premium market. We've got a new year. We need a new outlook. We need a new update. Over to you.
Cool. So, short and sweet as always, but I thought I'd give you a quick update on what's gone on in the market in 2024, and a few bits for 25. And I've called this, instead of a contents page, I've called this the good, the bad, and the ugly. But instead of the ugly, we'll just call it somewhat weird and wonderful and interesting bits. Um, I'm going to do what I shouldn't do is kind of start with the best bit first so that whoever listens to this and they tune out. I should do it at the end. Oh, hang on for it's like when you watch a video on YouTube. Oh, the most important ones at the
You're
end.
going to
So
play your
watch to the
best
end.
cards first. All right.
Yeah. So so talking about what's happened in the premium market in 2024. And actually I think that one of the things that's happened in that market, which has gone under the radar, which is I think a big monumental tectonic shift in the marketplace. Is around the biggest names in that field and what's happened to them. So, just to explain what we're looking at here, and for those that are maybe even listening, not watching, what this is the top 10 brands for listing and selling premium homes over, in this case, over £750,000. All of those top 10 names lost market share in 2024.
So
And
so this list is listed in order of of
of so what
growth.
this usually shows, a good question. So what this graph usually shows, so this is taken out the 20 CI insight system. Usually when you plot an area, you would look at it and you would say, okay, which of my competitors are growing and which ones are shrinking? And it gives you an idea of kind of who's doing what in the market. I looked at this and I thought I've never seen that before I'm spending a depressingly long amount of time in that 20 CI machine. And this is the first time I've seen it where every single one is declining from only a minor one they're probably not worried about right through to the fastest declining brands in there, and it really surprised me. This is in terms of market share of listings over seven hundred and fifty
So for
thousand
those
pounds and
people
above.
who are listening and not watching this, what we're looking at is comparing last this year's market share versus last year's market share effectively.
Yeah, it's like the last 12 months versus the 12 months before that. Where are their market shares? And then your friend of mine, Chris Watkin, spelt this out another way. He said that in 2019, the top 10 posh estate agencies, and I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but we'll just roll with it. The top 10 posh estate agencies sold 4 in 10 homes over £1 million. And in 2020, actually, I think it's 2023, but in 2023, they only sold 3 in 10, which doesn't sound like much, but that's a 25% reduction in the market share of the big guys. So I'm not here to revel in anyone's loss of market share by any stretch. Actually, I see this as a big opportunity for all of us, as I imagine the audience that we're talking to here as the RAN network of being typically somewhat smaller but leading independent businesses. I think this shows that the market dynamics are changing, customer desires are changing, and there's a huge opportunity to take some very lucrative business away from some of the big guys here. But what do you think of that? Is that something that surprised you, or you expected
Well,
to see that?
it does surprise me a little bit. I'm trying to sort of get my head around what this means as a bottom line on this data. So,
Mm.
if you look, we'll take KFH just as an example over there. This year's market share 1.4, last year's 1.41. So yeah, it's a minimal contraction, isn't it? But when I would look at it as an agent, where am I losing market share to? Where is that market share going to? What you're showing is that all of those, and let's go through it. You've got KFH, you've got Fine and Country, Dexter's, Savills, Stratton Parker, Winkworth, Chesterton's, Hamptons, Knight Frank, Foxtons, the likely suspects, if you like, in terms of big names, big brand names that you're used to seeing out there in the premium market, they've all lost market share. But where is their market share going to? Because none of them have grown their market share. So it's not like we could point to Foxtons and say, well, they've taken market share instead. So
Yeah.
where is it going?
Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it? And like you're quite right, some of it's just minor. The guys at KFH probably aren't worried about a 0.9% change in market share. But the ones towards the bottom of that field there, 15, 16% contraction in their business, which for them obviously is huge numbers because they're really
Yes.
big,
Yeah.
is super interesting. Um, what it can't be is another one of the big companies gaining that market share off of them because they would show up in this table, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
what it's got to be is kind of a decentralization of this business. So first of all, to say it's not that the market is shrinking. This is just their percentage of the pie. It doesn't matter how big or small the pie
It's not
is.
a volume question. It's not a
Exactly.
question of volume of transactions or anything like that. It's
Exactly. It's just
just
their
their share.
share of the market. Without stating the obvious. So what's happening is that this is being decentralized out to smaller businesses. And that's why I think that this is fantastic because this is opportunity for all of us running small independent businesses to tackle this. And I think there's a few. So you're never going to see one name in here because it will be lots of different agents in lots of different areas picking up lots of different bits of business, but never one that's collated enough to be a big name on the leaderboard here. I think a few things are maybe contributing to this, and I'd really like to know whether you think these assumptions are right or wrong, or you think anything else. I think there's three things that come to mind for me. One is there's the playing field's been leveled a bit. So where you might have had in the old school world of school ties and or black books of buyers that, or, what have you, that perception I think is largely gone. And better agents are growing their own databases, of course, and then you've got the property portals, which are sort of level the playing field, but that's nothing particularly new. I think maybe more pertinent to that is I guess two things you can almost roll into one, but one is a social media advantage that smaller companies have. So so in this, um, smaller businesses and especially personalities and the rise of effectively one-man bands as well can be very active on socials, very creative. They can bring their personality to the fore. And in bigger companies, there's a lot more restrictions on that. So so it's quite easy though to point the finger and say, oh, they shouldn't have these restrictions. They're archaic. They don't get it. They're stuck in the
Yeah.
dark ages. I don't think that's actually fair. I don't know whether you remember. I won't name any names here, but do you remember there was in the finals of Euro 2021? Do you remember there was a chap that worked for one of these companies and he put
Yeah, I
out a
do remember that.
particularly
Yeah.
ill-advised tweet or something, and
Yes.
that didn't go very well for him.
Yeah.
And I think anyone could have seen that coming. So that didn't go very well for him, but also had blowback on the brand. And when you're a bigger brand like they are, they've got obviously a lot more people to worry about and manage, and the higher risk of someone saying something stupid.
I
And secondly, you've got more brand at risk. So it's quite easy to be critical of that, but they've got their own
I
challenge there.
think you're right. I think ultimately, bigger brands obviously, I think they're better at policing that kind of social media policy, and they might need to inhibit the growth of personal brand.
Yeah,
But I think it's an important topic of conversation, perhaps not for today, but for any size of company, because how, you live and die by your reputation. When you've got a good personal brand and you are using that to show how great an agent or great a community you have, that's one thing. But if you slip up and you show something else, you have too many drinks on a night out,
yeah,
it's over. So
yeah.
it is something that we all need to be concerned about, I think.
Yeah, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and 5 minutes on Twitter when you're drunk at the Euros 2021 to ruin it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You got to be careful with it. But certainly exactly what you're saying there, the personal brand is increasingly important. I think on that note as well, I don't know whether you're feeling this, but I think that increasingly vendors want their agent to be their agent. So through from the first time they meet, even before they meet them actually, but say they meet them in a market appraisal through to the completion event, they want that same point of contact. Maybe that's more in the high end, maybe not. I think that's increasingly popular with vendors. Do you think agree or right or wrong?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair comment.
And then and then I suppose lastly in this is that if you bit of experimentation. We've all done some experimentation in our time, haven't we? So I think that smaller companies can have a little bit more scope and freedom to experiment with things. And if they don't work, they just move on and do something else.
Yes.
Whereas bigger companies, you could have death by committee trying to get something signed. I'm sure you've been there, I've been there. You committee, try and get something done. Whereas when you work in a smaller business, you can decide something in the morning and have it done that afternoon. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, you just don't do it again. but there's nobody's neck on the line if it does go south, whatever that idea was. So I think there's a lot there. And the last thing to say on all this as well is like what this goes to show is something that I've seen happen lots of times, which is when people want to get into the premium market, the perception verging on the fear is, oh, how do you go up against the big guys? Especially Savills is the name that always comes out. How do I go up
Yeah.
against Savills? Hundreds of years track record, hundreds, literally hundreds of years head start. What
The
am I going to
answer to that is
do?
personality.
Well, I mean, it's that it's a whole load of things, but also in my experience, they are much easier to unstick in a market than a local, really well established,
Yeah.
very connected to their community independent agent. They're the tricky ones. They're really, really tricky. So I know that's a negative looking thing, but I think for what we're talking about and who we're talking to, there's definitely reasons to be very cheerful for the future for getting a bit more of that
Great
premium
opportunity.
stock. Anyway, that's that. Just to fly on to some of the actual stats for 2024, what's actually happened. So the good, got the good, the bad, and the weird. But the good, new instructions are up 12% year on year, which is fantastic. 83% on 2019. A bit of that is going to be house price increases. In fairness, as this is just looking at stuff that's over a million. All this data has come from 20CI, but there's going to be a bit of that there. But still, that's a decent increase in the amount of supply on the
Yeah.
demand side. Then you've got 16% more properties that have been SSTC compared to the year before. So again, you could say it's just house prices, but there's equally a demand for these bigger properties, even while there's all this turmoil in the mortgage market that there has been. And they're going through and doing business. So
So
more
just
exchanges.
just for the kind of people like me who might need it spelling out to them, when we talk about SSTC, then I mean, because obviously we're going to talk about exchanges, we're talking
Yeah.
about basically properties under offer where
Yeah.
you've accepted an offer on them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's marked differently because obviously those under offer, subject to the contract, that is a different state than exchanges. And I think this is why when 20CI produce these stats, they refer to that as demand rather than sales. It just shows the level of appetite in the market to buy these bigger houses. And this is stuff over a million, which even for sort of my research is a bit toppy. So even at that end of the market is pretty strong. So that's all quite positive, I would say. Um, the bad, so there's a few bad things here. Fall throughs are up. And just to lump that in with something else, maybe is that time to move is up. So with the fall throughs up 9% year on year, and this time to move. So this is measuring between this is how 20CI do it anyway, from new instructions through to that SSTC flag for whatever reason they measure it as that, but it's 8% slower than it was in 2023, which is slower. And I don't know what you think. I always think there's a big correlation between how long it takes to actually move house and how many fall throughs there are, because every day that goes past is another reason for it to fall out of bed, right?
Absolutely. You lose momentum over time, don't you? It's harder to keep it up.
Yeah. On that note, in terms of they call it price changes very delicately, they don't call it price reductions. So that's very politically correct from 20CI there. They were up year on year by 12%, which is a pretty chunky increase, and 115% on 2019. I don't really understand what's going on there, but that's certainly interesting. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, really. Maybe it means that vendors are becoming more realistic in expectations, or catching up with the market, or maybe there was a hangover from some crazy COVID years. I didn't know whether to put that in the good or the
I
bad,
think
really,
that
but stuck in the
probably, I
bad.
think that probably was. I think you had a lot of price fluctuation in terms of surges really around 2019, didn't you?
Yeah, 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 exactly. Um, and then withdrawn being negative as well. So there's more withdrawn in 2024 than there was in 23, 12% more, so quite a big increase as well. Again, I would struggle to make too many assumptions on why that is exactly. Maybe it's a little bit correlated to prices that if someone's not willing to get a bit more realistic on their price, property's hanging around, they've had enough, do something else. If
Yeah.
their expectations are so out of line from the start that it's never gonna meet reality properly, maybe that's why. So that's the bad. And then I call it the interesting.
The
This
interest.
this is something that kind of puzzled me really, and I wasn't expecting to see this. So, um, the big the big wave of conversation at the moment in the industry is really okay. There's the AI stuff, but no one really knows how to do anything with that yet. Is around self-employed agents. Like we had the corporate wave, we had the online wave, and now we've got the self-employed wave that's here, and seemingly make a lot of sense because there's so much growth in that sector. And there is growth of it in the premium market of self-employed agents, but not as fast growing as I'd have expected it to have been. And I remember seeing even this stat is a little bit out of date now, but there was something like a 500% increase in the number of self-employed agents from, I believe it was 2019 to 2023, actually. But yeah, 500% increase in the number of self-employed agents in the whole of market. And I thought, wow, well, obviously that's a big number. But I was surprised how little it was in the premium market. And if I could explain why I'm surprised, is I think that that market would lend itself, but just I don't just sort of disclaimer. I don't really have a horse in this race, so to speak, because by the time we're not really a self-employed model. We work with licensees, and they can take on self-employed agents, but it's not really directly our game. I just thought that market would have lended itself to that one-on-one, high service, low volume business
It
model.
might do, but I think the flip side of that is what you and I always end up discussing is that agents normally assume that they're chasing a volume market and they therefore go after the what they would consider the lower hanging fruit. Now, there's a million reason why millions and millions of pounds of commission reasons why that isn't the case with the premium market and people um, I think they misconstrue it, don't they? But
Yeah,
so I think sometimes they assume, well, I'm chasing my 250, 350,000 pound instructions because they're easier to sell. I'm going to get more of them rather than looking at a niche kind of premium market. But as you and I both know, that's not the case. You know.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's not. And I think you're completely right. And the other thing is if I okay, I'm a stupid person to answer this question of myself, but if I was going to be a self-employed agent, I think I'd go for the premium because otherwise, if you're chasing a volume game as a one-man band, as a lone operator, you're up against companies that have the investment and the infrastructure and valuers, negotiators, sales progressors, front office teams, back office teams to handle volume. Whereas if it's you on your own trying to manage volume, that's a hard road to hoe. Don't get me wrong, there's loads of people that do a fantastic job of it and more credit to them. They're much better than me at it. But I'm just surprised that isn't more popular perhaps than it is. But one pinch of salt with this, and we did a bit of a full podcast on the mine and Matt's podcast. We do Property Porn Stars, the stupidest named podcast in the industry, and we had Paul Jameson from 20CI on there, and he even said, look, you've got to take this one with a pinch of salt because you can imagine it's very hard for them to measure what is a self-employed agent. I mean, you must know lots of companies that you work with where they might have a self-employed element to their business, even if they're not, a mammoth EXP
Yeah.
clearly labeled as self-employed. So I think that's going to be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt. So that's basically a very quick summary without boring people to death on stats of what's happened in 2024. And then I thought looking ahead for 2025 and beyond, very helpfully yesterday, they must have known we were doing this podcast because Savills released their prime forecast. I thought, thank you very much. That's
Have
exactly
that.
what we'll have a bit of that. They released their forecast, and the bit that I looked at was I don't want to be unfair about that, but I think that especially central London just operates and having been quite close to that market, operates in a different sphere to the rest of us.
Yeah,
Like
it
it's
distorts. It's a market of its own, isn't it, really?
totally overseas money and it's just much more susceptible to currency fluctuations and so on than we would be in the
You're
physical
amongst friends.
market.
You can use the word oligarchs if you want. It's not a dirty word.
Just on that, I saw a graph that really made me laugh the other day. I'm verging on the political here, but it was like a couple of weeks ago where Zuckerberg threw his hat in the ring with Trump after Musk had, and then Bezos was at the inauguration and everything.
Yeah.
And have you ever seen one of these Google search trends graphs? They did it just for based from searches in America, and the search term was "What is an oligarch?" And then it went on and on nothing, and then it got to about a week ago and suddenly skyrocketed.
It's very much in the press at the moment, but even in a property sense, we're talking, and that's really why sometimes you can discount the premium market in London so easily, is that all of these guys are it's what do they say, that 1% of the world's population that has such a high concentration of wealth and firepower in terms of what they're able to buy
Yeah.
compared to the rest of us.
Yes.
And there's just a massive gap in between. It's not like it's not a gradual incline, is it? You're either there or you're not. And I think
Yeah.
that most of us, for the most part, and the premium market spread over the rest of the UK is a lot more consistent, isn't it? Because we're talking about homegrown buyers mostly, and people just generally progressing up the ladder, because they sold a house at 500,000, they bought one at 750, they sell that, they get to 1 million, and so on and so on and so on, rather than somebody coming straight in at 20 mil straight away, as a first time buyer. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Who's 19 years old and everyone
yeah,
looks the other way when the AML comes
turn,
around. Yeah.
turning up in the Lamborghini. Yeah, it's
This checks out. This is fine.
yeah,
Yeah, I completely agree. And the market that there are all these mega mansions that you have in central London and all this sort of stuff. Fine, great, good business for those that are competing there. And the market does operate very, very differently there. They have Lonres and they share fees, and it is just a different world altogether. Not really my kettle of fish per se. And the way to best sort of describe it in my head is just successful people's homes. These are people that have, like you say, gone up the ladder or done well or been successful, and they're in that marketplace. It's not the kind of people that are buying or selling a property based on whether sterling's fallen or risen against the pound or something like that.
yeah,
Sorry, excuse me, against the dollar. So that's why I chose the outside of London, and actually correlating in with exactly what you've said there is Savills, who've got a very impressive research department. They were saying that the thing that's going to make the most difference to that market is going to be driven by the mortgage market. So and the what happens to the base rate and so on this year. So yeah, you're exactly right. This isn't someone swooping in with 20 million pounds of dubiously acquired money. This is someone who is leveraged to some degree as well in the mortgage market and susceptible to that, as we all are. And as well, a bit of it coming on to the London thing, maybe a bit of increased demand and therefore prices in some of the provinces where, especially where schooling is good, now that the VAT's been imposed on private schooling as well, where people are going to move around and change lifestyle or even downsize potentially to accommodate that if they've got kids that are either in or going into private schooling as well. So, an obvious thing to say is that those in areas with the good schools are going to do especially well off the back of that recent bit of legislation. Anyway, what that amounts to is looking at Savills research here, taking that as all prime regional, between 2 and 5% annual price growth in those markets. So in 5 years to September 29, they expect an 18.2% average house price increase in their prime markets, and they call that £1 million and above as well. Um, Hell of a thing to have the confidence to predict to September 2029, isn't it?
yeah. It's just
Fair
curious.
play to him.
You can see it sort of peaks around 2027. It's going to be a good year for all of us, and it seems to be going the other. What do they know that we don't know?
Yeah, they've got the crystal ball well hidden. So anyway, I think if that's what happens, then we'd all take that. Hopefully, touch wood, the worst of the eventfulness is behind us. And we did have a lot to distract us in the market last year: UK election, US election, 6 months worth of foreboding before the budget, and some rate changes in there as well. And the Euros again, I think, wasn't it? Was it the Euros last year? Yeah, it was, wasn't it? That was a good excuse to distract you from buying or selling a house, isn't it? You need something. So all things being equal, should be a good market. So there we go. Here endeth the sermon for you today, David. Hopefully short and sweet, but I've got no idea how much time's elapsed there.
So a bit of positivity there at the end.
I, I hope so.
So for those agents watching it, if we can give them another takeaway. So you've dangled the carrot of opportunities. We started at that graph where certain agents, the big names, the usual suspects as we called them, are losing a bit of market share. Give us some tips that agents can use then to take advantage of those opportunities. So if I am an agent and I do work in the premium market, what could I be doing to get a steal and maybe to grab that market share?
So is this for an agent who is already in the premium market or someone who's not in the premium market thinking of going into it?
Both really, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Go
okay.
on.
So I think right. First of all, the idea of a silver bullet doesn't really exist, but there is. It's surprisingly it's not easy, but it's not that it is impossible to get that market share. I mean, that's what we're seeing happen over a national picture with those big companies that have lost their market shares to other smaller companies in that place. Um, there's this idea of omnipresence, so making sure that your customers can see you in an online format, in a physical format, in a printed format, in adverts as well, and I mean that in social ads and whatever it might be, even billboards. We've had someone by design advertise on a billboard and got some business from it. Um, and we've talked about things already here that they can be doing. The stuff that I think has led to a bit of the decline of the big brands. So that heavy leaning into an authentic personal brand on social media is really important. Trying different things is important as well. But what is really interesting is sometimes it's the things that you wouldn't expect, and sometimes the things that aren't quite so sexy that actually work really well. So someone that I worked with in by design had this happen to them where they had it comes back to something that you said when we were talking off air about that agent who had the person following them around doing the behind the scenes videography stuff. And this agent had this. He had someone that was following him around doing it behind the scenes. And I remember I went to one of the properties he was taking on as he was doing the marketing for it. And there was him being filmed by the professional videographer who was being filmed by his sort of social media guy that was following him around. And then there was me filming all of that happening on my phone. And it was this weird Inception level event
Very
going on of
meta, yeah.
content. Very better, very surreal. Had all that. Didn't really move the dial for him. It was really interesting. And I believe he's actually canned the person that was doing that for him. Whereas he invested, and this is going to sound crazy in this day and age, he invested a lot of money into a particularly beautiful and very high quality, bound like a book that you would see on a designer coffee table somewhere, brochure for this property. And he didn't have that many printed, five or six, something like that. But this was a particularly high end property, and those have won him business when he handed those out to the very best buyers that were coming around to see it. It was those that won business for him. So I guess we could talk about this until the cows come home, but I think there is this element of being omnipresent and being everywhere and making sure that your customers can find you when they are exposed to you often. But secondly, is that the stuff that seems old school sometimes can actually yield the best results. So as to not get too wrapped up
I
in
think you hit the nail
the
on the head
TikTok
with
dances.
authenticity. And I think sometimes that this kind of whole behind the scenes stuff of I'm just getting on doing my job, but there's somebody filming me whilst I'm doing it. You know you're being filmed, and therefore it just kind of it lowers the level of authenticity because
Yeah,
you maybe seem to be putting on a bit of a show, whereas that raw kind of personal brand stuff that people do in terms of talking straight to a camera and just really not rehearsed and not polished, sometimes
yeah,
that goes a lot further, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think the people want that, they relate to it better, and they feel like they know you when you come around to do the appointment. And you've done so much of the groundwork and the preparation of winning that trust before you even get there that you're 10 steps ahead of the competition even before you've pitched. Sometimes you don't even really need to pitch by that point as well. So I think that's hugely important. From my own personal sake, I'd say something. I had a conversation, had a conversation with an agent. He was a really good agent, and he was looking to get into the premium market. And the problem that he was having was this guy was the full package in himself, but the problem was he was just starting out, and that's kind of unavoidable. But what would happen is he'd go out and he'd pitch, but then someone would go and check out his website and he'd have three listings on there.
Yeah.
And there is, and I understand, I know that it's you shouldn't, but I do understand where the customers were coming from, and I think he appreciated it as well. That it's very hard to trust someone with something that important, not because he was particularly untrustworthy, but just that this was such a new venture. You think, oh, is this going to be around for a long time or what have you? There was just and to have that scale behind you is important when you go into pitch to these people because it adds trust and reliability. There was a really interesting bit of psychology that I heard from, I don't know whether you listen to much of his stuff, but Rory Sutherland, the marketing guy, and he said that you're much more likely to trust the quality of food from a kebab shop rather than a kebab van. And he said the reason for that is that if the kebab shop messes up your order and gives you food poisoning, you'll tarnish their reputation to everyone you meet. And there's not a lot they can do with being a bricks and mortar
Yeah.
establishment in a fixed location. Their reputation is everything. If the guy in the van gives you salmonella and you slate him for it, he doesn't really care. He can just go on to the next
Part further up the
town
road.
and flog
Yeah.
his wares there. And from this estate agent's point of view, the customers were looking at him going, "Oh, you can be here today, gone tomorrow. What do your other listings look like? What does your marketing look like? Where's the credibility? Where's the reach? This feels a bit twee, arguably." So there is something to be said for the collaboration, and this is with a vested interest, I suppose, and by design. But it's just a fast track to doing it.
Because you've
Is
got backing of a wider brand, haven't you? And there is
yeah,
critical mass, isn't there, really, when people are looking at number of listings and your clout in the area.
yeah,
And
exactly.
I've always see, there are some agents that have tried to use it to their advantage and say, well, look, you're number one with me, not one of a number. I've only got two clients, and therefore I'm going to give you all my love and attention. But on the other hand, the agent that's got 20 listings in that area can say, look, with confidence, if you're between 1 million and 2 million, you can be sure that I am talking to every possible buyer in that area because I'm showing them everything.
Yeah.
So I think there are the two perspectives, and it's interesting, isn't it? I think that collaboration point is the way that is the only way really that you can crack it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think if not for the fact that you make your life easy, you can ask people questions, you can use their stock in your own area, even though it's nowhere near. So we've got uh just listed yesterday this beautiful house overlooking the beach on the Cornish coastline. And here I am in Cambridgeshire, and I'll be promoting that property here just as readily because that's a nice thing. First of all, it's very different on socials. And secondly, is it's a nice thing for people to see, oh, okay, then you've got this scope and reach and variation and buyers and sellers coming from everywhere. So it adds to that trust and confidence. So starting out is hard, but you can make it easier if you collaborate with others. And it's a nice thing to do as well. It's a bit lonely otherwise.
So such a lovely note to end on.
Isn't it?
David,
Very,
thank
very heartwarming.
thank you, very wholesome. Thank you for your time, and thank you once again for giving us your unique perspective on the premium market. We're going to check in with you again, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Cheers, David. Thanks so much.